Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janeen, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Hi, friends. I'm so glad you've joined me today. So I first heard about my guest on another podcast, one of my favorites, called A Little Bit Culty. The episode was all about the troubled teen industry, also known as TTI, and the guest was Meg Applegate, and she was sharing about her horrific experiences as a teen in a therapeutic boarding school and wilderness program. And I'm very interested in this topic because many of my clients in my private practice have also had negative experiences in therapeutic programs, and I was hoping to gain some insight. So while I'm listening to this, I realize Meg is mentioning during the interview that she was late diagnosed autistic. And that, of course, made me more interested for obvious reasons, but mostly because I really wanted to speak with her about her experience from the perspective of an autistic adolescent. So I was thrilled when she graciously agreed to come on as a guest and talk about these experiences, as well as her new memoir, Becoming Unsilenced, which I have a copy of right here. We'll link to that in the show notes. The book is incredible, and we'll be talking about it during our conversation. We're going to cover many aspects of this industry, including the fact that there's very little regulation or oversight for a program or programs that treat children and adolescents. Parents often have no idea what they're signing up for, so you'll hear about that. And I've had several clients that have had to come to me to process the trauma of being in these programs. So this is just a little trigger warning. We're going to be talking about abuse. We're going to be talking about some really difficult stuff, so be sure to listen with care. And you will find out during this conversation why I will no longer be recommending these programs. You'll also hear about how Meg's autism affected her behavior as well as her survival tactics in the program. And you'll learn how she is helping to make this industry safer and more transparent. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Meg Applegate. Well, Meg Applegate, thank you so much for coming on the Autism Blueprint Podcast. How are you today?
Good. I'm so thankful you had me to hear.
Yeah, it's so great to have you.
I need to have some coffee. Oh my gosh, my brain.
Me too.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is wonderful. I first heard you on A Little Bit Culty's podcast with Sarah Nippy. And
gotcha.
I just loved your story. And then when I had heard a little more about you being diagnosed with autism later in life, I thought I have to reach out. And you were so kind to get back to me right away. And when I heard you just so happened to have a book coming out, I grabbed it. And as soon as it came out, which it just did, about a month ago, right?
No, it came out like a week and a half ago.
A week and a half ago. Wow. Okay, yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm. Good. So I really want to tell people about this book for so many reasons, which we'll get into during our conversation. But usually when I start, I ask people to tell us how they got to their current place in life. Which is really what your whole book is pretty much about. But exactly. Give us a little bit of like the elevator pitch for your book.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I am a survivor of the troubled teen industry, which, the troubled teen industry is a network of powerful and punitive congregate care facilities that claim to reform youth or fix youth. However, they use a wide array of, techniques like behavior modification and other things that really make youth leaving these facilities consider themselves survivors. And so I spent 3.5 years in these types of facilities from the ages of 15 to 18 and a half. And I also came from a background of being adopted, as you said, being, undiagnosed autistic throughout my life. So I had that inherent trauma. And, what brought me to where I am today? The answer would be I had to take a lot of falls and go through a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, a lot of trials in order to figure out how they were going to play into my life and kind of decide who I was going to be from that and how I was going to live out my life and what my purpose would be. And that's kind of the book, is really figuring out who I am and what parts of me I want to be a part of me, part of myself, and what parts I would rather just kind of keep stacked on a shelf. And they're a part of me, but they're not active. And, kind of choosing your own destiny.
I love that. I love that you referred to parts, because I do a lot of
Oh yeah,
parts work.
parts therapy is the best. I love it.
Oh my gosh, amazing, amazing. And for
Mhm.
those that don't know about parts therapy, I'll link to it in the show notes. But I was really just struck by what you suffered. So the abuse that you're talking about that's happening in the troubled teen industry, it was certainly more pervasive and severe than anything that I knew about. And I've been
Yes.
in the field for, gosh, a decade and a half. And I've heard of wilderness programs and boarding schools being recommended for some of my clients who are on the spectrum and, have had, these quote unquote behavior problems, which very often can be handled, in an outpatient setting. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up there.
Yeah. So, and that's a long story, isn't
Yes.
it? Let's see. I always struggled with feeling like I fit in. I had a hard time making friends. Anytime it came to social interactions, I made friends quickly, but then somehow I would end up with not having that friend anymore, and it would be really painful. And I never really understood why. So, it wasn't overt to where people would look at me and be like, "Oh, she has some things that she needs to work through. She has like issues with being social." It was so small. It was not small, but very insidious, if that makes sense. And not everyone really understood. So there was that aspect. And with being adopted, also, it plays into attachment issues and feeling abandoned. And I was really still working out that adoption trauma. And so I always felt different than my parents and my brother, who was biological. And that was definitely self-instilled. I just didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel worthy enough. And that was there from the beginning. But basically, when I started high school, I started really falling academically and started to push back on authority. And I found my place in high school with the counterculture kids, the kids that were smoking pot and ditching school, and they accepted me. And that was a lot for someone that really never felt accepted. And part of being a part of that was to start smoking pot and ditching school. And it was actually after I had ditched school once, and while my friend and I had ditched school, we drank some beer from this guy who bought us some beer. I believe we were drugged, and we were unfortunately sexually assaulted during that time. And the school actually they expelled us for drinking alcohol during school hours, even though we were assaulted during that time. They didn't believe us. And yeah, I mean, about, I don't know, a couple weeks later, 4 weeks later, maybe max, I woke up to two strangers at the side of my bed telling me that I'm coming with them in the middle of the night. So it was a really short period of time. However, I think that the educational consultants that my parents had hired to help them with alternative placements had been hired a long time ago, I think. And so they had been in talks about placing me there for a while, to placing me in the two different places. I think it was much more planned than just 4 weeks later. I think it was kind of a coincidence that the expulsion happened, and then so soon after I was taken.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like it wasn't like a one-off incident, but my goodness, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Thank you.
How old were you at this time?
So I was 15 when I was abducted, and I didn't get out of the programs until I was about 18 and a half. So I was well over being an adult when I left.
So this is
Um,
basically your entire adolescence.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I know that the book goes into more detail, and it's so well written, Meg. We really get
Oh,
a
thank you.
sense. Yeah, in the book, I just really got a sense of the pain you were in, but you were also very clear about what happened and how it happened. And I think that's great.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you.
how much. So you say that you were abducted. I've heard other people say kidnapped.
Mhm.
And at first, when I first heard that term, I thought, wow, that's kind of a strong word. But my goodness, yes, you were. Like, tell us a
Definitely
little bit
kidnapped.
about what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, these people that do this for a living, they're called escort services. They're or a transport, service or transport company. They exist only for the moving of youth from one place to another. Many times they are, ex-cops and bodyguards and things like that. So there's a really wide array of like different experiences that you can see. I've talked to people that were hogtied and put in the back of the car, and like blindfolded and gagged. Like there's a
Mm.
lot of variations. Thankfully, I didn't have to go through that. But it basically consisted of a wake up at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., I kind of forget which, and they said, "You're coming with us." And yeah, they basically said, "You are coming with us." And I said, "No, I'm not." And they basically said, "We could do this the easy way or the hard way." And they then told me that the hard way consisted of handcuffs, which really scared me. I thought that I was going to jail. And so my first instinct was, oh my God, where are my parents? Even though you think you're this big grown up adult at the age of 15, how quickly you feel like a child. And you're like, oh my God, where are my parents? They're going to
Yeah.
help me. And I looked at the door and I saw both my parents standing at the door and they were crying and looking at me and saying, "We're not abandoning you. We're not abandoning you." And I knew that they were a part of it at that point. And that's when I started being really angry. And then I'm like, well, can I go to the bathroom? Can I undress and get changed? And they told me they had to watch me do both of those things. And then the breaking point for myself with the anger was I said, can I at least pack a bag? And they said, your parents already did. And that's when I lost it. And I screamed at my parents that I hated them, that I would never speak to them again. I cussed at them and they basically, they grabbed me, they took me up the stairs and they placed me in the back of the car, the SUV, and we drove to LAX. And um, even when we got to the airport, I wasn't allowed to know where I was going. So they didn't answer any questions. And so I remember they faced me away from the gate. So I couldn't see where I was going. They didn't give me a ticket or anything. And I didn't know until they had sat me on the plane. And I heard the captain say, "We're on our way to Boise, Idaho." And I was like, what is going on? And that's when they handed me two letters, one from my mom and one from my dad, kind of explaining this is why we're doing this. And that's when I like disassociated completely. And
Yeah.
I don't even remember the plane ride, any of it. I just remember entering Intermountain Hospital.
Okay. Okay. Um, and just to let our listeners know, I'm sure that there are lots of parents out there that just are in a position where like they don't know what to do. They don't know where to
Right.
turn.
Right.
And so they turn to this method, but you're telling me that ex-bodyguards and ex-cops are taking you on a flight? Like, uh, do they have any mental health training?
No, usually not. Usually the training, if any, that they have are going to be in like uh weight training
Right.
and like like being big and bulky and strong. I know that one of the guys, Big John was his name, huge guy. He was one of them, and then the other one was more a petite woman, but she was like very strong, and I think she was an ex-police officer. So these people are not coming as mental health professionals, and furthermore, we're talking about this industry as though it's quote treatment, right?
Yeah.
But the very basis and foundation of any kind of relationship with a therapeutic provider should be based on trust. And unless there's trust, there is no treatment, so to speak. So, unwillingly taking children, anyone, and forcing them into a therapeutic environment is not only going to likely not be successful because it's not based on trust and it's not willing, but it's also kind of unethical.
Extremely unethical.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say, oh, here, change, and we're going to take you from your support system, your environment, your whole community, and we're going to force you to change.
Wow. And as you outline in the book, that did not go well.
No. No.
And so I guess the thought I'm having just in working with people who are neurodivergent and on the spectrum, at this time, you didn't know you were on the autism spectrum.
No, I
You
didn't.
just knew you were different.
Yeah.
And
I just knew I felt different. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, were you someone that, like, oh my gosh, it just blows my mind. I'm thinking of all the things we do in our office just for outpatient therapy to prepare an autistic client to come see us.
Yeah, I know.
Which is, showing them pictures of the office, making sure they agree to come in.
I know. Imagine taking them and just forcing them into environments.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I know.
of course, you're either going to, I'm thinking about my own children, you're either going to dissociate and completely shut down, or you're going to beat somebody up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I've never experienced aggressiveness, really, physical aggression. I've never had that component, but I definitely get verbal aggression, and I'm very, very direct, and I get out my aggression in that way. And that's kind of how I handled it, is more so, so, I mean, the doctor's notes from that time when I was 15 are just kind of funny, because they'll say, like, they said Meg was the most formidable patient that he's ever had. And they'll be like, Meg continues to maintain that she doesn't have bipolar disorder and that the meds aren't doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. But I'm telling her that she just doesn't know what the real normal is. Like, it's so funny because I was so right and I was 15, and here's this PhD MD telling me, like, she's not right. Like, and it's even in the notes that I'm advocating for myself. Right. And he was so wrong. I wasn't bipolar disorder. And so, yeah, no, it's definitely for people who don't like change, for people who have a hard time transitioning. It's bad. It's bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that would be bad for any person, let alone any adolescent who's already going through a hard time. And then on top of it, you're autistic. So my goodness. I'm wondering, for you, like, looking back, how much do you think your undiagnosed autism contributed to the issues you were currently having at that time as a teen?
I think that almost all of the issues that I was going through were contributed to by either ADHD, that potentially was like under medicated, perhaps, like maybe the wrong medications, and autism. The feedback I got when I got to these different programs were, you need to give up control. That's rigidity. That's not control. That's me being very rigid on ideas. They would say things like, you're intrusive. It's like, no, I'm not trying to be intrusive, but it was all about, Meg, you need to learn that you don't have control in everything in your life, and you need to sit down, shut up, and realize how everything that happens to you is your fault. I mean, that's virtually what they tried to put me through. I think that everything that I was going through at home, they would call me intrusive. I didn't have a filter, is what my dad used to tell me. One of the biggest things also was I never knew how I was coming off. So I had a lack of understanding and perspective. That was a big thing. So I would be giving attitude and rolling my eyes, and I would have no idea that I'm doing it, but I'd get in trouble with authority because there was a disconnection between what my brain was thinking and what I thought my affect was. And I also wear my emotions on my sleeve. I'm not able to fake anything. I'm extremely rigid with honesty. And so, if you feel something, I have to say it. So I think that a lot of those things ended up putting me into the programs. And I have to say that I think that if my parents knew now what they know, they never would have done that. Right.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. And just to give everybody the happy ending part, you have reconciled with your parents and they are advocating just as much as
Oh
you are,
yeah.
it sounds
Oh
like.
yeah. They are my biggest fans. They call me their hero. I don't understand it, but
Oh.
they are incredible. And I think that, if there are survivors out there who are listening, I do have to recognize just how privileged I am to have parents who recognize my trauma. And I think that that's something that honestly makes me really sad. I think most survivors in this community don't get that. And it's really important that they know that they deserve that. They deserve to know that a decision their parents made was wrong. And it's really hard as parents to admit that. And oftentimes I never get that. So I do want to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a really, really good point. There was something that jumped out at me in your book. Do you mind if I read it?
No, go for it.
Okay. Um, you were saying you were talking about being at the Chrysalis program. Tell us real quick what Chrysalis was.
So Chrysalis is a therapeutic boarding school and it's in northern Montana. And it's a different type of program. It's a small program. It was all girls. There was 10 girls when I got there. And it operates almost like you're a family. We called each other Chrysalis sisters. There's house parents and they're married couple, they're therapists, there are therapists. We're like sharing a bathroom with our therapists and living in a room next to our therapist. Just very strange dynamics going on. And in my mind, in my opinion, it felt very similar to a cult. And what I went through during those years was what I consider, based on my experiences, to be indoctrination into,
Yeah.
yeah. So
100%, 100%. And I see that indoctrination in a lot of quote unquote therapies, particularly for autism.
yeah.
But that's for another show. Um, so you were saying there was a time I remember arguing with my father, going back and forth with him. He turned to me and said, "I wish I had a tape recorder to record the way you talk because you have no idea how you're coming off to others," which is what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Then you go on to say, "I certainly wasn't going to develop that understanding further at Chrysalis. There, if you did something wrong, they communicated with you by giving you an extra 2 hours of gardening or filling wheelbarrows with rocks. They made you so scared to make a mistake that you became a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Because of the ways I was punished back then, I became a prisoner. The mask they wanted me to wear became fully fixed to my face."
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. So
That right there is the basis of my therapy today, is learning what is Meg's actual face and what is the mask. It became infused.
And that's something we work on too in my office when I have late diagnosed autistics, is that they say, "I don't know really who I am because
Hmm.
you've been masking for so long." But
Yeah.
the way you describe that mask as in something that you needed to survive this
Hmm.
horrible situation. And thank goodness you had that skill.
Yeah. I think it was, you know, I only think about it as just like grit. It was like forced. And I remember the point where I reached that less of a fight and more just like that learned helplessness point.
Yeah.
I remember that point that I met where I'm like, I just don't care. I just okay. Like it was that, okay, I'm going to accept that feedback now. And it just became like a part of just, it was like a robot. Thank you for your feedback. Just
Wow.
you just get into this, you get into the zone, you get into we call it working the program, and you just focus on working the program. To put into perspective about just how scared you were to make a mistake, I'll give you two examples. First, I don't know, I don't think I put this in the book. Um, when you're at Chrysalis and you're on a certain level, you're allowed to go to the high school, which I talked about. And so I went to the public high school for 2 years. It's very weird in a TTI facility to have that happen. It's very unique. However, if you miss the bus, so you have to be out there like 6:30. I think I remember the bus being around 6:30. And if you miss the bus, you have to ride your bike to school, and it's 14 miles.
Wow.
And I am a rule follower, shocker. And so I am always on time, type A with that, right? One time my alarm didn't go off. and I was minutes late to the bus. And I went back to Kenny and I asked him, I said, I've never missed the bus. It's been a year and a half. Can you please drive me into town? And he said, nope, you got to ride your bike. It was like 6 degrees out and there was snow, and I had to ride my bike 14 miles in the snow to get to school. And I barely made it in time. And I couldn't even go to class. I had to go out of my first period and sit by the floor heater because I was so cold. And so I missed an entire class because I was just shaking and so freezing. So that's one anecdote. And then the second one is schoolwork, very important, right? But then I also have chores and I have all that stuff that I have to do. But let's say you left out something overnight, whether that's a textbook or something like a sweater or a water bottle, or the classic example of a winter coat in the middle of winter. It goes to jail. So if you leave anything out in a common room, it goes to jail, and it is in jail until you do a consequence to get it out. So every consequence for a jail item. So let's say you left your like 5 things out for your test on Monday. Every jail item is 30 minutes of consequence. So you would have 2.5 hours of consequences before you could study for your exam, just as an example. So you're really scared of making any kind of mistake, and it teaches you to live in a very over hyper aware kind of space. Just, oh my gosh, did I do this? Oh, shoot, did I do this? Just constantly trying to make sure you don't mess up.
And for someone with ADHD and autism, my goodness, I mean, working memory can be an issue. So, wow.
Yeah, executive functioning was definitely not what it was back then either. So, I think the ADHD is actually the part that made that the most difficult to deal with. Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of parents who are they try to take that tough love approach. Well, if they're not ready if they're not ready for school on time, I'm going to make them walk. And there's a fine line between abusing your child and disciplining your child.
Yeah, natural consequences. There's a fine line, right? I talk about that in the book too. That I do believe in natural consequences. A natural consequence for me is, let's say, a child that's skipping out on school and they're not going to graduate. Now, tough love in that circumstance would potentially be, if you don't graduate, you're not allowed under this roof. Having a consequence that goes beyond the actual scope of that decision. Now, a natural consequence in my mind would be, well, now they're wanting you to pay for something because they don't have a diploma, or they're wanting you to do something and get a workaround to get them a job. If you don't go and do these things, I'm not going to save you. And the natural consequences, you don't get a diploma, which means A, B, and C after that. So it teaches them, oh, well, if I want to fix this, I'm going to go back and get my diploma. I'm going to go fix that mistake because I didn't like this little consequence that I caused. If it's something like homelessness, you're literally throwing someone into the deep end that has nothing to do with getting your diploma or not when you're 18. And you're forcing them to deal with consequences that are far outside of the scope of normal.
Yes. Oh, I love the way you explained that. And I think I remember in the book you saying that your consequences would become so long and so extreme that after a while you were like, well, I'm already in trouble, so I might as well just throw in the towel and live it up.
And it's not just the consequences that make you scared of making mistakes. It's also the fear of losing your levels, right? Your levels are everything. It took 1.5 years to get my level 2. Which allows you to go on home visits. So it's just like, oh my gosh, that's a long time to wait. And if you're on level 2, you bet you're not going to mess up, because you want to be able to have all of the privileges.
Yeah. So for people listening thinking, well, then didn't that work, to kind of straighten you out? What would you say?
I'd say that the countless dollars I've spent on therapy since would beg to differ. I mean, I have had, let's put it into this perspective for those who understand what adverse childhood experiences are. It's called ACEs. ACEs are a very important scale and metric that helps mental health professionals understand just how much early childhood trauma a person has gone through before they reach the age of 18. That really honestly dictates future success and health, and in many different ways. Now, ACE scores usually give, like I said, to try to figure out the amount of trauma that's existent. Now, I didn't take one before I got sent away. However, if I was to take one in the 15-year-old brain that I had, I would have scored a 1 out of 10. Okay. Now, if I take one now, I score a 7 out of 10. So the treatment that, and I say that in quotes, the treatment programs that I went to created more trauma than I had beforehand. And I think that is the most important thing to remember. It's not even for the people out there that are program owners going, no, 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 no. We're evidence-based, we're all this stuff. It's like that doesn't happen with evidence-based.
Yeah.
That is not outcome-based, and any treatment should be based on outcomes. And so I think that narrates exactly, and I haven't met a survivor yet that didn't have a higher ACE score coming out than they did going in.
Yes, yes. And just for our listeners who may not be familiar with the ACE score, we give that to all of our new patients that come into our office, because it gives us a really good snapshot of, what they could have possibly been through without them having to talk about it. And
Right.
as far as I understand, anything above a 4, if you have at least 4 or higher, I could be wrong about that, but it's around
No, that's
there.
correct.
Yeah, if it's a 4 or higher, you will have significantly more risk for all kinds of things. I mean, even physical
Morbidity and mortality. I mean,
Yes,
to be honest,
completely.
I
So
mean, with an
7,
ACE score of 4 or more, it's 1,226 times more likely to commit suicide.
wow.
So, I mean, that puts it into perspective for you. It increases the rate of substance use, obesity, hypertension. I mean, you name it. It's no wonder that so many survivors like myself have so many health issues. It's the body, when you hold on to trauma like that, it does a lot to your body. That's why it's so important to get treatment.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. And a lot of people don't understand that connection.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in my autistic clients just from being autistic and going so long without being diagnosed. So
Yep.
for those that have had, in treatment, in hospital stays and things like that, even under the best circumstances, they will still come away with some trauma that we have to process based on how they viewed the situation. So,
I think growing up autistic in general will cause trauma. Just
yes.
Even if you don't go through abusive kind of therapies or anything like that, I think the world is not built for autistics. And it should be, obviously, but especially given how many people are autistic out there. But I think inherently there is that feeling of always feeling different because the world wasn't built for us and we're having to adapt, not the other people. We are the ones that adapt. And when you don't feel like you fit in and like we have to change to be able to feel accepted, feel worthy, feel loved, yada, 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 that creates trauma when you don't feel accepted for who you are.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I see that in the autistic community. I see it in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
It's, the research is clear.
Mm-hmm.
So why aren't we as health professionals using the research to create the right programs? And I know some people are. I know there are some out there. Talk a little bit about your organization, Unsilenced, and how they're helping with that.
Yeah, so Unsilenced is a nonprofit that aims to stop institutional child abuse by empowering self-advocates to promote lasting social change. And the way that we do that is multi-pronged. We really, first and foremost, focus on prevention. So we are going into communities to re-educate decision makers as to the issues with the troubled teen industry, the reasons why youth need to stay within their communities whenever possible, and the importance of finding more regulations and oversight and reporting in these programs. And what the goal is that with that is to interrupt the pipelines that currently exist between the communities and these institutions. And then another way that we help with prevention, which also goes into awareness, which is another big one for us, is our program archive. Online, we have over 100,000 documents, and those are lawsuits, DHS reports, police records, survivor stories, with information on over 3,500 different programs. And the goal here is, again, to put the information out into the public's hands and really you can't make good decisions unless you have the information. And this industry just really doesn't encourage transparency at all. So we work to make that happen. And another thing we do is really focusing on supporting survivors. And the way that we make that happen is first by connecting survivors of the troubled teen industry with attorneys who are able and willing to litigate cases and help with options for justice. Many survivors come out with definitely things that should be used to hold programs accountable and bad actors within those programs as well. And then also with other kinds of justice, for survivors that maybe don't want to go that avenue, what other ways can you find justice within yourself, whether that's like talking on a podcast or telling your story through our social media, or just finding a community group that you can talk about being a survivor and how difficult it is, right? So that, and then we also directly support survivors by providing community support groups free of cost to survivors. Nice. We actually have a support group dedicated to neurodivergent individuals that we have right now.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is
it an online?
Yeah, it's all on Zoom. Yep, all on Zoom, and it's free of cost. And these are led by mental health professionals and trauma experts. And we also have a general support group that's led by 2 mental health professionals. That happens as well. And then we also send out independence packs, which are packs that are for survivors who are battling homelessness and housing instability as a result of leaving the program. Many times parents kick the kid out of the house when they're 18 and they don't get to have any of that transitional stuff. So we give them, we send them out anywhere in the United States, a backpack that has a laptop pre-loaded with tons of resources and kind of information on how to get back on your feet. And there's books on the TTI, there's gift cards, essential items, things like that to help directly support survivors.
Meg, that's amazing. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that work in the nonprofit sector, and so many nonprofits, they raise money for the cause, but then you never see the money being used in,
yeah.
You know what I mean? In such boots on the ground ways that you guys are doing. It's just phenomenal.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I will definitely be linking to that in the show notes.
Our next initiative, I'll have to say, is this has been my, within my 5-year plan from the beginning, is I really, really, really want to start a scholarship fund for survivors. And I want this fund, once developed, to really help survivors meet the needs that tend to happen when you're dealing with trauma in your everyday life, like we do, whether that's like paying for a copay to go find a therapist. I can't tell you how many survivors want to go to therapy, but can't afford the copay. Right. Or can't afford therapy at all. Like, that's what I want the scholarship to be for. I want it to be for survivors that maybe just can't pay the utilities this month because they had to take too many days off of work from triggers and then lost their job. Right. This happens all the time. Yep. So building a scholarship fund is definitely in the line of sight for us, and being able to offer those kind of connecting needs that happen within the community.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You are like kind of fast forward. And so I want to make it clear to our listeners, like, I'm not going to have you go into, great detail about the traumas that you experienced, but if they want to hear more about it, the book does go into, detail about some of your stories. This isn't just a kid that felt, like they weren't treated properly. This is like you said, there's a pipeline.
Yeah.
Explain the pipeline that you're talking about.
Yeah. So we see kids entering these facilities from various places, but the most common are going to be, obviously, like me, parent placement. Mm-hmm. And then there's going to be juvenile justice, child welfare. We see a lot of kids, a huge amount of kids coming through school districts. So that is public dollars. That is tax-paying dollars, public funds. $23 billion a year in taxpayer dollars are being used annually. So these kids are having trouble, so they get an IEP, and maybe they continue to have trouble within the school, and then they get sent, and the school district is funding this. So yeah, it's pretty
funding. And so two goons basically coming in your room in the middle of the night and abducting you and putting you on a plane and you don't know where you're going. That's not just your story. That's a very common story.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I wish I can say that my story isn't common, but it's so common. It's so common. And it's actually, you'll learn in the book, what helped wake me up was when I watched This Is Paris, and Paris Hilton was talking about how when she was woken up in the middle of the night, they said the words, "You're coming with me. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." And that's when I woke up and I was like, "Oh my, wait a second. There isn't just a chrysalis. There are tons of these." And I realized we were just all part of the game, right? And I just realized in that moment, oh my gosh, it's an industry. And so to have someone that I had never met her at that point. So how do all these survivors have the same stories of being abducted? I mean, it's wild.
Yeah. And here, it's funny you mentioned that. I just watched the documentary last night because you had mentioned it in podcasts or in your book. And I thought, like you make assumptions about people in the media, and you just think, oh, well, she's got plenty of money. She'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's generally what people will think. And watching that documentary was so good. It was so well done.
I know, it's really well done.
Showed just her growth. And I mean, just a beautiful documentary if anybody wants to check
it really
that
shows
out.
who she is too. Like, I've obviously been around Paris a few times at this point, and she's not the person that America really thought that she was, if that makes sense. She was playing a part. She was she was wearing the mask, right? She was she was wearing that mask that a lot of survivors wear to make sure other people don't see further than skin deep what was really going on. And so to make that, she was really the first to do like a documentary on that stuff and really call out the entire stuff. And that really fueled the entire movement. I know so many survivors that are just so thankful for her telling her story, because even just simply telling her story made millions of people just feel so validated that they matter and their stories matter. So it was really important part of the movement.
Oh, huge. It's such a courageous thing that both of you are doing in using your voice to help other people so they don't have to go through it. I admire that so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. What advice do you have for parents who are kind of at their wits' end and looking for, what do we do with this kid that's, out of control?
First, look within. There are no relationships in the world that are all the other person's fault. And my advice always to parents is remember that although we made them, I'm saying this as a mom, although we created them, although we made them, they are not an extension of us. And their own path is going to look a lot different than what you may want for them or what you may need for them or what is comfortable or uncomfortable. And it's really important that if you want to have a relationship with your child throughout your life, you have to let them have their own. And I think too often I see parents that are saying things like they're smoking weed and they're starting to skip school. And in my head, I don't say this to them, but in my head, I'm saying, sounds like they're a normal teenager. And I know that's not comfortable. I know that's really uncomfortable that your kid is doing that. However, it's very normal. And as long as you can provide a safe place to fall, they will always be there and they will always come, so it's not about at that stage with teenagerhood. It's not about being a parent if in the same way that you think it is. It's more about being a guide and kind of helping along the way and being there when they fall and being that support system always, but less of telling them what to do and providing structure to make the decisions that you would make. And so I would say, look within. Look at what you could potentially change to help your child, because that is your job as a parent. And so I always tell parents that are truly at the end of their rope, go find a parent coach. Find a parent coach that can help you behind the scenes. There's no labeling done of your child is going to therapy because they're bad or they need to fix something. It's you getting help on how you can alter your parenting to better help that particular child, because it's going to be different with every kid you have.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think it's really important to get that help behind the scenes first and foremost before we start labeling as they're troubled, right? Just remember that that is going to stick with them their entire life.
Yeah.
And so I would say that also to really utilize community resources. Most people don't understand just how many exist
Yeah.
within the communities, and be wary of anyone. I don't care how many letters they have after their name, be wary of anyone that says that one program can fix everything. And I would also say that the word fix is a huge red flag as well. So, um, uh, also check out unsilence.org, and you're going to find a list of red flags. If you have
Mhm.
a kid in a program right now, if you are thinking about residential treatment, please go to unsilence.org and look at program red flags. And if that program is utilizing any of those red flags, I would really rethink whether or not your child should be there or should be going there.
I love that you said that. I've used your website a couple of times before, giving my blessing to wherever a parent wanted to send a child, and I've given them the website as well, and it's just such a fantastic resource. I work closely with other clinicians in the community, and one of them helps place kids in inpatient and intensive outpatient and things like that. And she had told me at one point when I first started kind of working in conjunction with her, she said, "Oh, I'm not going to recommend anything that I don't personally know has outcome based, you know, I mean, not just evidence based, but outcome based research about the program on how the kids are doing." I'm
Yeah.
wondering, but I'm wondering though too, in your book you talk about how you woke up. Like at
Mhm.
first you were all about these programs and they had basically brainwashed you into
Yeah.
saying, I had a good experience. Can you talk
hmm
just a little about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you have to operate within the confines of the confinement of the program. So your thoughts really only extend as far as they will allow. And what they want you to believe is that you are who you are because of them. They're to thank, and you wouldn't be where you are if you hadn't have gone to that place. And it's more of it's very much so a breaking down of who you are by, like I said, forced labor. Attack therapy was one of the biggest ones. I was in 8 to 16 hours of attack therapy every week. Um, by breaking you down, they can then build you up in the ideal way that they want you to be in order to be easier to deal with, or, fill in the blank. The more individualized the treatment, the more expensive it is, the more frustrating it is. So they want everyone to kind of be the same, if that makes sense. And that's why at Unsilenced, we really don't advocate for any residential treatment at all. And while we do understand inpatient care sometimes is necessary, right? For a crisis, stabilization, short stays, we understand 100%. But we don't see programs that are residential within this industry that are profit based and truly incentivized by the care of the patient. We've never really seen it. And in fact, I've seen a shift, I think you mentioned earlier, into more programs seeing more diagnoses of autism come out,
Yeah.
and a very big in for this industry to create autism specific programs. And that is very dangerous, not only because, like I said, a lot of us are just born with trauma because we're growing up autistic, diagnosed or not. There's trauma inherent in both paths, but also because these programs are based, how long you stay at a place is based off of diagnosis codes. And they already tend to choose diagnosis codes that have a longer treatment, such as attachment disorder, ODD. Those things require longer treatments. I don't think those require residential treatment at all,
Yeah.
or long-term residential treatment for that matter. But they do try to use those diagnosis codes because insurance will help with it. It helps dictate longer stays. Now, ASD, you have ASD the rest of your life. So, and it's based off of their notes. So you're going to inherently see longer stays. And you have to remember that the communication was often cut off from the child and the parents or any caregivers, and the information is only from the therapists and the staff. So if they say your kid is not doing well, they need a longer stay, that's what the decision is. And you have to remember the kid doesn't feel comfortable because they're currently not being treated the best, and they have fear of retaliation and all this stuff. They're not going to be honest. If they are, they're brave as heck. But, most kids are going to be scared to tell the truth.
Well, and you had mentioned before the learned helplessness of when you get there, they're already setting you up and setting your parents up for the expectation that you're going to say, I'm being mistreated. That you're going to
they warn the parents.
They warn the parents. They're going to say they're mistreated. They're going to say they're not doing okay. They're going to say somebody hurt them. Don't believe them. It's just them trying to get out of it. So they set the stage. I mean, this is like a classic abusive relationship.
Yes.
It's just amazing.
It really is. If you look at how these programs function, you'll see Darvo all over it. It's very, very wild. And yeah, they prep the parents. Like, here's what you can expect from the first months of your child being with us. You may hear things like they're not getting enough food or water, like in wilderness programs, for instance, like they're exercising too much or too much hiking. This is what it means, because they've taken the most common complaints that they get and they're trying to mitigate it and make it, less of a liability, I guess,
Yeah.
Really sad.
Absolutely.
And if you do say something, they'll just hang up the phone. And because they're listening, right? They'll just hang up the phone and then they'll call the parents back and be like, see, I warned you about this. Here's how we should proceed.
It just makes me want to hug your little 15-year-old self. And
I know we talk about it all the time. One of my favorite memes that I saw once and now just like means the world to me is, you've become the child, you've become the adult that the inner child that you as a kid needed to save you. And I just remind myself of that, what we went through is just a little bit easier when we think about the fact that, who I am today is who I needed to rescue me. And I think that thinking about it in that terms kind of makes it a little less crappy, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I so appreciate you coming on today and talking to us about this.
I'm happy to.
It's super important for our autism families, especially. The question I ask everybody at the end that comes on the show is, if every autism parent and professional were listening, what would you want them to know other than what you've already outlined?
Autism parent and professional.
Mm-hmm.
They're okay the way they are.
I love that.
That's what I would say. Because I think that there's, not just the troubled teen industry. I think a lot of people and their view of autism, there's almost like a view of like, what do they need to change to better fit me? Instead of like, no, you're accepted the way you are. And however they want to be is totally acceptable. And it's not up to you to decide.
I love it. I love it. And I put you on the spot, so that was brilliant.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Meg, thanks so much. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, definitely go find me on Instagram and on TikTok. My handle is the same. It's at Meg Applegate, and that's spelled Applegate. Or you can also go to megapplegate.com, where you can have a link to purchase my book, or you can find it on Amazon, and you can read more about everything we're up to at Unsilenced, which is www.unsilenced.org.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Meg, and best of luck to you in your journey.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.